The storm arrived before the midwives could. The sky cracked open with a bolt of red lightning so fierce it lit the clouds like fire, staining them with a crimson hue that seemed to bleed into the earth. Thunder groaned low like the voice of something ancient awakening. And inside the smallest hut at the far edge of the village, a woman named Sira screamed into the void as her body tore itself open to bring life into the world. There were no chance to welcome the newborn. No gathering of women to sing lullabies or wrap the child in embroidered cloth. Only Sira's strangled cries and the raw scent of blood, sweat and something else, something metallic, something wrong. When the baby came, the midwife who finally arrived stepped back in horror. The storm outside howled louder, and another red bolt slashed the sky directly above the hut. The child did not cry. She opened her eyes, wide and unblinking, and stared straight at the midwife, who dropped the bloodied cloth she was holding. "She is not right," the midwife muttered, her voice trembling. "She has no tears," whispered another. The baby's skin was pale, not sickly but luminous, like moonlight pressed into flesh. Her irises were a muted silver, ringed with flickers of red that shimmered with each flash of lightning. Her fingers curled not in search of warmth, but as if grasping something unseen, as if already aware that comfort would never be freely given. When the storm passed, abruptly, unnaturally, the sun rose but did not feel like morning. The village elder, a crooked old man with eyes like dust and a spine bent by the weight of too many omens, arrived after the sky had returned to blue. He did not enter the hut. He stood outside, feet planted in the mud, listening to the strange stillness that had settled over the dwelling. When the midwife emerged holding the silent child wrapped in plain cloth, he did not reach for her. Instead he turned his back and spat into the dirt. "She is born of the red storm," he said coldly. "She is cursed." The villagers gathered slowly, drawn by curiosity and dread. Whispers flitted from mouth to ear. The women clutched their infants tighter. Men crossed their arms over their chests and narrowed their eyes. No one congratulated the new mother. And when they found Sira dead inside the hut, her face strangely peaceful despite the blood that still pooled beneath her, the whispers became sharper. "The child took her breath," someone muttered. "She didn't even cry," another added. "Not even once." From that moment on, the baby was not called by any sacred name from the ancestral list. They named her Luma, a word once used for flickering things, for fading light. It was not a name of welcome but a warning. She was raised by the midwife, though the woman never called her daughter and never let her touch the things she held dear. Luma was given the barest corner of the house, a mat near the back door where cold winds blew in during the rainy season. She was taught how to gather herbs, how to boil water for poultices, but never allowed to brew medicine herself. The midwife said her fingers would poison the roots. And so Luma learned to watch. She watched everything and everyone. When she was 5, a boy tripped near the well and cracked his head open on the stone rim. He didn't die but he lost the ability to speak. People said it was because Luma had looked at him too long. When she was 7, the crops failed across 3 farms. The villagers claimed it was because she had passed through the fields that week, humming softly to herself. They said her breath carried rot. That even the wind refused to touch her. Children her age were forbidden from playing with her. Mothers scolded them if they came too close. "Do you want to lose your voice too?" they would say. "Do you want your shadows to come loose?" Luma learned not to speak unless asked. Even then, her voice was always quiet, barely above a whisper, as if she feared her own breath might harm the air. She walked with her eyes downcast, not because she was ashamed, but because everyone flinched when she looked at them too directly. But she was not dull, not dimmed by their fear. Inside, she carried questions no one would answer and thoughts she never dared voice. She read the skies the way others read goat entrails. She knew when a fever was coming just by the smell of sweat in a room. She once caught a raven in mid-flight by merely holding out her hand at the right moment. Still, everything bad was her fault. When the blacksmith's wife miscarried, they said it was because Luma had passed by their house the day before. When the river flooded too early in the season, drowning 2 goats and washing away the fishing baskets, the elder declared it was punishment for allowing the cursed girl to live near water. By the time she was 12, even her footsteps on the village paths made people murmur. She had no friends. No one knew what made her laugh. Even the dogs avoided her, tails tucked low. But Luma grew. Not in the way weeds grow, wild and tangled, but like something waiting. Her silence was not timid. It was thick with listening. Her eyes missed nothing. She moved like a shadow that chose not to speak unless the world forced her to. One afternoon, a merchant passed through the village and left behind a polished mirror. It was cracked in one corner but it still held light. Luma found it discarded near the old well and took it back to her mat. When she looked into it, she saw not a cursed girl but a face she could not define. Her own. And something else in the reflection. An outline barely there, shaped like a crown made of smoke. That night, the midwife caught her staring into the mirror and slapped it from her hands. "No more of your wickedness," she hissed. "Do you want the winds to return? Do you want red fire to rain down again?" The mirror shattered. 2 days later, lightning struck the largest tree in the village square. It split straight down the middle, fire crawling across its branches like veins. The elder stood before the crowd and said, "It is her. She must be kept away." Luma was forced to sleep outside that night. And the night after. And so it continued. Even the midwife did not protest when the villagers began to treat Luma as an unclean thing. She left food for her outside in a bowl and told her to fetch it after dark like one might feed a jackal. By 15, Luma no longer tried to prove she was harmless. She wore her silence like armor. The few times she spoke, her words came out slow and precise, measured like rainfall before a drought breaks. Once, during the dry season, a group of boys tried to corner her near the yam sheds, teasing her, daring her to curse them. One of them grabbed her arm. Luma looked at him, just once, and said nothing. The next day he woke up screaming, unable to move his legs. He swore he saw a red snake curled beside him, though no one else saw it. Even those who had once pitied her grew afraid. They never asked if Luma had friends in the forest, or if something listened to her when she spoke beneath her breath at dusk. They never asked if the birds that circled her house at night were just birds. They only saw what they feared and called it proof. And yet, Luma never wept in front of them. Her tears came in private, when the sky was loud and the winds carried the scent of something changing. She would kneel in the mud outside the village, looking up at the stars and whispering to no one, "Why did you give me breath if only to be hated for it?" She never got an answer. But the wind always shifted when she asked, as if listening. And somewhere deep in the woods, something stirred when she spoke. Not with anger but with interest. Something that remembered the red storm. Something that had waited too. Luma was 8 when she noticed the wind never touched her. It was the season when the harmattan swept through the village, when everything smelled of dry earth and dust, and the wind danced with mischief, tugging at skirts and flapping open windows with restless fingers. Children ran barefoot through the fields chasing leaves. Mothers clutched their scarves tighter against the gusts. Even the cattle shivered in their pens, ears twitching at every sharp whistle of air. But Luma's world remained still. She first noticed it while sitting beneath the fig tree near the well. The wind rushed past in furious waves, lifting the branches high above her, shaking the fruit loose, swirling the dust into tiny cyclones around the base of the tree. And yet, not a single strand of her hair moved. Her dress hung untouched around her legs. The space she occupied was as quiet as a sealed jar. She reached out her hand, curious, and saw the dust spin away from her fingertips like she was fire or poison. She did not speak of it. She had long since learned that everything she said was weighed and feared. Instead she watched. And with each passing week, the wind's silence became louder to her than thunder. Leaves swirled down in spirals but never landed on her. Even in a crowded space, the breeze curved around her body as though guided by an unseen hand. When she walked near fire, the flames leaned away, flickering and sputtering like startled animals. At first she thought it coincidence. Then one morning, while helping the midwife boil herbs, the fire in the clay stove snapped upward and flared when she stepped close. The flames didn't burn her. They trembled, then bent sharply sideways, avoiding her completely. The midwife looked at the coals, muttered something about devil breath, and didn't speak to Luma for 2 days after. By 10, Luma had already accepted that she was different. Not because she wanted to be. Not because she had chosen anything. But because the world had already decided it for her. It had written her story in frightened whispers and buried it beneath years of superstition and fear. The animals were the first to notice her strangeness. Not in hatred, at least not at first, but in stillness. When she walked past the goats, they stopped chewing. Chickens froze mid-scratch and tilted their heads, eyes beady and alert. Even the wild dogs that skulked around the edges of the village lowered their tails and crouched low when she came near. Birds sometimes circled once, twice, 3 times above her before flying off in tight, worried formations. And when she spoke, even the crickets paused their song. Her voice was soft, careful, and rarely used. But when she dared to utter a word aloud, especially in the open, it was as though nature itself leaned in to listen. One night, she sat alone behind the healer's hut, murmuring a lullaby she had heard long ago. A slow, broken tune, something about a river and a child who never returned. As the last note left her lips, a pair of owls landed nearby, one on the low fence, the other on a tree limb. They didn't blink. They didn't hoot. They just sat staring. The next morning, one of the owls was found dead in the garden. No wounds. No feathers out of place. Its body was cool, but its eyes were still open, glassy and white. That was the first death. By the time she was 11, her father, what little he had been, had grown afraid of her. He was a silent man by nature, tall and coarse-skinned, with hands like bark and a face etched deep with bitterness. After Sira's death, he had buried himself in work, mending roofs and herding goats, never speaking of the child that bore his blood. But something shifted after the owl. He started to watch her more closely, always from a distance. And one day when she reached for a bowl at the table, he flinched. "You should eat outside," he said flatly. She obeyed. It started small. First, she was told not to sit at the table when others were present. Then not to speak during meals. Then to avoid the village path during peak hours. Her father no longer met her eyes. And when he did, there was something sharp in his gaze, like a knife he hadn't decided to use yet. Word spread. "She carries stillness like a curse," a woman whispered during market. "The wind fears her," another added. "She walks like someone who listens to the dead." A decision was made without ever being formally spoken. Luma must be veiled. The midwife fetched a plain cloth the color of ash and handed it to her one morning. "Wear this," she said. "And bow your head when you walk." "Why?" Luma asked. "Because it's better to be unseen than feared," the woman replied, not unkindly. So Luma obeyed again. The veil covered her face from forehead to chin, hiding the strange shimmer in her eyes. Her shoulders curled inwards. Her feet grew quiet. She passed through the village like a ghost who dared not disturb the living. And yet, her silence made her even more noticeable. The cloth around her face became a symbol. Mothers nudged their children behind them when she passed. Men averted their gaze. She was no longer just Luma. She was the girl with the silent wind. Even the trees began to lean away from her path. The crow came the following spring. She had gone to the edge of the fields to collect herbs growing wild among the weeds. The veil was heavy that day, hot with sweat beneath the sun. Her hands moved swiftly, her mind elsewhere, on the sounds of distant singing, on the way the ground always felt colder beneath her bare feet. Then a sharp caw split the air above her. A single crow swooped low and circled 3 times, its wings slicing the silence like knives. Luma froze. The crow descended swiftly, too fast, and slammed into the earth just a foot from her. Its body convulsed once, wings flapping wildly, then went still. Luma stepped closer. The bird lay sprawled, beak slightly open, chest twitching with a final, shallow breath. Its eyes, once black, now glowed faintly white, not bright but unmistakably lit from within. Like a coal at the end of its life. Then it died. She knelt beside it, reached out her hand but didn't touch it. Her breath trembled. Behind her, someone screamed. A woman gathering cassava had seen the whole thing. By sundown, every villager knew. That night, 2 elders came to the midwife's house. They didn't ask questions. They issued instructions. She must stay within the hut unless we call her. No more wandering. No more speaking. If she sings again, she will be cast out. The midwife didn't argue. She simply nodded. Then turned to Luma and whispered, "Don't give them reason to act." But the village had already decided Luma was a reason. Birds avoided her now, even the scavengers. No flies landed near her. When it rained, the drops curved subtly in the air before they reached her skin. Thunder came without warning, as if her presence short-circuited the natural order of things. And in the silence of each night, as she lay beneath a leaking roof, veil still pressed over her mouth, she wondered if perhaps they were right. If maybe something had gone wrong the day she was born. If maybe she was cursed. She didn't feel evil. But she didn't feel human either. She had dreams she couldn't explain, of walking through forests where trees whispered her name, of standing at the edge of a cliff with no wind in her face but fire in her chest. Of a crown, not gold, not bone, but something made of ash and wind, being placed on her head by hands she couldn't see. She never told anyone. Luma spoke less and less, even to herself. Her body moved on memory alone. She no longer listened to the gossip, to the muttering, to the prayers said just loud enough for her to hear. She stopped responding to her name altogether. People began to say she had become empty. But they were wrong. She had not emptied. She had grown full, with something vast and quiet and waiting. With something windless. And the stillness followed her as always. Even now, even here where no one wanted her, the world watched. The crows never came back, but something else had started circling the skies. Something too high to see. Something that made no sound. And deep in the earth, beneath roots and stone, something old began to stir. The man arrived on the third day after the fireflies failed to return. The villagers had noticed their absence in silence, for fireflies were believed to carry blessings from the ancestors, flitting between the living and the spirits like messengers with glowing tails. When none lit the trees that season, some muttered about imbalance. Others about her. But no one said it aloud, until the man came. He rode into the village on a tall, dark horse that made no sound as it stepped across the dirt path, hooves leaving no prints. His cloak was long, made of a material none could name. It shimmered slightly, not like silk or velvet, but like heat rising off stone. His face was smooth, too smooth, like it had forgotten to grow lines or folds. And though the sun stood high above him, blazing directly down, no shadow followed his footsteps. Not one villager mentioned this. They greeted him like royalty with eyes wide and backs bent low. For all his strangeness, he carried wealth. The rings on his fingers gleamed with stones no one had ever seen. His boots were spotless despite the dust. His voice, when he spoke, was neither deep nor high, but clear like a bell struck from the inside. "I've come for her," he said, smiling as he dismounted. "Who?" asked the elder, though he already knew. "The girl born under the red storm. Luma." The elder glanced toward the healer's hut, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to the man and nodded once. "She will be made ready." That night the village celebrated. They slaughtered a goat and roasted it over the fire. Women sang again for the first time in months. Children danced in a ring. Men drank fermented maize and shouted blessings at the stars. To them it was a miracle. Someone wanted Luma. Someone had come, not to curse or kill or cast her out, but to take her far away. She would be married. Gone. No longer their burden. The midwife said nothing. Luma sat outside the hut, veil pressed to her lips, watching the flicker of flames in the distance. No one had asked her consent. No one had dared. When the man came to see her, it was not with gifts or greetings. He appeared beside her like a thought she hadn't meant to have. "You are smaller than I expected," he said softly. She did not reply. He crouched beside her, balancing perfectly on the balls of his feet. His cloak didn't shift. The air around him remained unnaturally still, windless, breathless. "I saw your birth," he added, turning his head slightly, though not quite looking at her. "I was there." She stiffened. No one else had ever said that. Not even the midwife. "Why?" she asked, her voice nearly soundless. "I've waited for the signs," he answered. "And now they're all here. The withered moon. The river birds nesting out of season. The storm with no rain. It is time." His smile was gentle, but it did not reach his eyes. She watched the ground beside him. No shadow. Not even a flicker. That night she could not sleep. The animals had vanished from around the hut. The goats had retreated to the far end of the pen and refused to eat. The chickens huddled together like stones, feathers puffed, beaks silent. A lizard that often crept by her window each night had not come. She lay awake, eyes on the cracked ceiling, thinking of fireflies and wind. Of the crow with white eyes. Of a man who claimed to have seen her birth. By morning the preparations had begun. The villagers came bearing cloth and beads and things they had never given her before. Bright fabrics, strange oils for her skin, ornaments shaped like moons and teeth. They braided her hair with red thread and gold wire. They tried to smile at her, awkwardly, like one might smile at a ghost that had stopped haunting. No one met her gaze for long. The wedding was set for the next full moon, only 10 nights away. "He is not from our lands," the midwife muttered one evening as she ground bitter roots for tea. "He speaks our tongue too well. His eyes are too dry. And the birds won't land where he walks." "Then why say yes?" Luma asked. The midwife looked away. "Because no one says no to something older than fear." The man, for all his mystery, made no threats. He wandered the village in silence, smiling at people he passed. Always calm. Always clean. He touched nothing. Slept in a hut no one remembered building. Ate food no one saw him chew. Children peeked at him from behind fences, but he never beckoned them closer. And though he spoke kindly, his presence made the shadows in the huts bend the wrong way. Once, a woman swore she saw him standing in her doorway in the middle of the night, though the door was still latched from the inside. "He means her no harm," the elder said when asked. "He came with purpose. Who are we to refuse the will of fate?" Luma sat beneath the fig tree again. She removed her veil for the first time in days, letting the sun touch her skin. The wind still avoided her. Leaves spiraled in wide circles around her feet. She closed her eyes. What did marriage mean to a girl like her? No dowry had been discussed. No choice given. It was not love. It was not union. It was transaction. They wanted her gone. And yet, beneath her fear, there was something else. Not curiosity. Not hope. But a question that had no words. What are you becoming? That night, she walked to the riverbank alone. The moon was a thin slash in the sky. The water moved sluggishly, reflecting only fragments of light. As she bent to scoop water into her palm, her reflection wavered. Not because of ripples, but because something stood beside her. She turned. The man. "You're not afraid of being seen alone with me?" she asked. "I've never hidden." "That's not true," she said quietly. "You hide from the sun." He smiled again, broader this time. "You notice things. The crows avoid you. They know what I am. And what are you?" "I am the end of waiting," he said. "You were born to be found." Luma shivered, though the night was warm. "Why me?" "You carry a silence the world forgot," he said. "And I've come to bring it back." She stepped away. The wind once again avoided her. But it also avoided him. The air between them was too still. "I will not belong to someone I fear," she said. He tilted his head. "You don't fear me. You fear yourself." She turned and ran. Not far, just enough to breathe again. In the days that followed, she grew quiet once more. But now the silence held weight, like iron wrapped in cloth. The village continued preparations. Drums were practiced. Flowers gathered. The women sang old wedding songs that hadn't been used in years. And all the while, animals stayed away. A cow refused to pass by the stranger's hut. 2 cats vanished. A nightbird was found dead with its eyes turned to white. Still no one called off the wedding. The moon began to swell in the sky, inching toward fullness. On the night before the ceremony, Luma stood before the mirror shard she had hidden years ago. Her face was the same. And yet not. There was a tension in her gaze now, a sharpness in the way her lips pressed together. "Why are you letting them do this?" she asked her reflection. And the wind shifted. For the first time in years, a breeze touched her cheek. It was faint, but real. The veil she had worn slipped from its hook and fell to the floor. In the trees outside, something moved, not a bird, not an animal, but something slow and listening. She turned to the door. And the wind followed. The night before the wedding, the air hung thick and strange, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Even the insects were quiet. No crickets sang. No frogs croaked. The village slept restlessly, fires guttered low, and clouds moved in slow, unnatural patterns overhead, as if drawn by invisible hands. Luma lay on a straw mat in the far corner of the hut that had been prepared for her. A wedding gift, they said, though it was more a cell than a chamber. Its walls were bare. Its floor smelled of old ash and stone. She had not eaten that evening. Her stomach turned at the thought of sharing breath with a man who had no shadow, whose footsteps left no impression, whose gaze pierced things that shouldn't be seen. She had removed her veil. She no longer cared if they saw her face. Let them believe she was cursed. Let them shrink from her. Their fear at least was honest. Their smiles were not. Outside, the wind stirred in brief pulses, coming and going like the last exhalations of something dying. Luma lay still, her fingers curled beneath her chin, her eyes wide open. Sleep came slowly, like sinking into a cold pond, and when it finally took her, it did not bring rest. She found herself in a field she had never seen before, vast and gray, with grass like silver needles. The sky was dark above her, not night, not storm, but something in between, a heavy veil pressing down from above. There were no stars. No moon. No wind. She stood barefoot in the silence, wearing a dress that shimmered like water, her hair unbound and heavy around her shoulders. And then she heard it. A sound beneath her feet. A murmur. She knelt, placing both palms against the cold ground. The grass bent back from her touch like it feared her, revealing black soil underneath. The sound grew clearer, words, spoken in a voice that echoed not from above but from below. "Luma." She froze. "Luma, listen." The voice was soft and rasped like leaves crushed underfoot. It did not frighten her, but it made her bones ache. "Who are you?" she whispered into the earth. There was a silence so long it became a pulse in her ears. Then the ground cracked. A thin line opened beneath her hands, and from that fissure came a glow, pale and silver, the same light she had sometimes glimpsed in her own eyes during storms. A figure began to rise from the earth, not fully formed, a ghost made of smoke and memory. Her mother. Not as she had seen her in the old village drawings or in the few stories told by the midwife, but distorted. Her skin fine and fragile like cracked porcelain, as if it had been stitched together by grief. Her eyes were closed, but her mouth moved. "Don't let them bind you," the figure said. Luma's voice broke. "Mother?" The figure opened its eyes slowly. They glowed white, faintly like a dying ember. "You are not the curse," her mother whispered. "You are the seal." "I don't understand, seal of what?" The earth beneath her trembled slightly, just enough for her to feel the rhythm of something ancient and buried. The field around them began to shiver. Shadows rippled across the horizon like creatures waking from long sleep. "They lied to you," her mother continued. "They always have." "Who?" "The ones who named you cursed. The ones who feared your breath, your silence. They see only the surface." The figure began to flicker, her face splitting and reforming with each word. "Then who am I?" Luma asked, her voice shaking. "You are what holds it back." "What?" "The old hunger," her mother said, and her voice cracked. "The deep hunger. The one beneath the earth, beneath the roots, beneath the bones of time. It stirs now because they try to unmake the seal. The man, they brought him, but he is not a man. He was sealed once too. And now he seeks to break what binds him." The dream began to fracture around the edges. The sky pulsed. The field tilted. Her mother reached for her. "Luma, you must choose. Be bound, or become." "Become what?" she cried. But the figure was already breaking, shattering into ash and wind. "Awaken," her mother whispered. "Remember." Luma gasped and sat up in the hut, drenched in sweat, heart slamming against her ribs like a beast trying to escape a cage. The mat beneath her felt damp, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs, but she had not lit any fire. Her hands trembled as she touched the ground. It was cold, but vibrating, faintly, almost imperceptibly. She rose slowly, stepping outside. The village was silent. The stars were strangely bright. The moon, not yet full, hung behind a veil of clouds like a half-closed eye. But the ground beneath her bare feet still hummed with something unnatural. She walked to the edge of the trees. There, in the darkness, she saw something move, not a person, not an animal, but a shape. "A blur." She whispered, "Are you watching me?" The shape froze. Then the trees behind it twisted, not breaking, not falling, but recoiling, as if whatever stood there did not belong to the world they knew. Luma stepped back. And again the wind touched her skin. It had returned. Only slightly, but enough. A gift or a warning. She turned and walked back to the hut, but the dream clung to her, heavy as a chain. She stared at her hands, remembering her mother's words. "You're the seal. Not a monster. Not a curse. A barrier." But then what was behind her? What had the man truly come for? And why had no one else seen it? The next morning, the village prepared for the ceremony. Drums began to beat. Dancers smeared red clay across their arms. A string of bells was tied near the altar. And Luma sat alone, fingers pressed to her lips. She felt something shifting beneath the ground again. Not trembling. Breathing. Asked ChatGPT. The wedding dress was laid out before dawn, spread across the low altar in the center of the ceremonial hut. It shimmered with threads of bone-colored silk, embroidered with delicate red beads shaped like droplets. The villagers said it had been a gift from the suitor's land, sewn by hand from fabric that had never touched dirt. They called it sacred. Untouched. Meant for purity. Meant for sealing. Luma stood bare and silent as the seamstress, a frail woman with trembling fingers, approached her with the dress draped over her arms. No one asked if she was ready. No one looked into her eyes. The seamstress whispered a prayer as she stepped behind Luma and began slipping the gown over her shoulders. The silk clung to her skin strangely, as if it remembered something. As if it was waking up. By the time it reached her waist, the seamstress froze. A dark patch had begun to spread across the bodice. She reached down, touched the seam at the side, and screamed. The villagers waiting outside rushed in, breath caught in their throats as they saw what had happened. From the seam where silk met skin, red liquid was seeping out, not thick like paint or dye but unmistakably blood. It trailed down her ribs in thin lines, staining the white cloth in irregular streaks. The dress itself began to darken, the silk tightening. Luma stood still, unmoving, eyes wide open. She felt no pain. Only heat. The seamstress stumbled back, shaking her hands as though they were burning. "It's bleeding," she cried. "The dress is bleeding." Gasps turned to murmurs. Someone backed away. Someone else whispered, "She's rejecting the vow. Her curse won't allow the binding. The priest, dressed in layered white robes and a collar of hollow bones, stepped through the doorway with a look of forced calm. "This is not a sign to halt the union," he said quickly, raising his voice over the panic. "This is the power inside her resisting, yes, but that is expected. The seal must be completed. She must be made safe." "She's bleeding from threats," a woman whispered. "That's not resistance, that's omen." The priest turned to Luma. His expression was flat, measured, practiced. "You must be wrapped." Luma did not move. The blood still oozed from the seams of the gown. Yet her body bore no wound. No source. No pain. Only the gown responded, as though it had been alive or meant for another. Two attendants came forward with long cords, dyed white and marked with ink symbols meant to ward off the unseen. They wound them tightly around Luma's waist, arms, chest, and legs, binding her as one would bind a creature for sacrifice. Her breathing grew shallow beneath the weight, but she did not resist. "She must not speak during the vows," the priest instructed. "If she opens her mouth, the old breath may escape." The cords dug into her skin. She could still feel the ground humming beneath her feet. Still feel the warning from the dream curling behind her eyes. Her mother's words rang louder than the chanting outside the hut. "Don't let them bind you. You are not the curse. You are the seal." And now they were binding her in truth, trying to suppress what they didn't understand. Her silence. Her breath. Her being. When they were finished, she stood wrapped head to toe like a sacred offering. The bleeding had stopped, but the dress was ruined, stained with winding red lines that now looked more like veins than tears. The villagers refused to meet her gaze as they led her out. Even the children had gone quiet. Only the wind followed her. And it whispered, "Not yet." The village square had never seen so many gathered at once. Every man, woman, and child stood packed along the edges, pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath the heavy silence of an unnatural sky. The air buzzed with tension like a tightly drawn string about to snap. No music played. No drums. No laughter. Only a low murmuring of voices, like bees lost in a storm, and the shuffling of feet on dust-hardened earth. Luma stood at the threshold of the procession path, surrounded by silent women in white, their faces painted with chalk and lines meant to ward off bad spirits. She wore the bleeding gown, now dried and crusted along the seams. The red had darkened to maroon, staining her from shoulder to ankle like a second skin. The cords still bound her tightly. Her veil remained in place. They had tied it on her again that morning, more tightly than before, and this time, stitched it at the corners so it wouldn't lift. A white cloth across her mouth. A warning sign. A burial shroud for someone still alive. Above her, the sky had begun to shift. It started with the color. Not gray. Not storm black. But a deep, mottled purple, like bruised fruit rotting from within. The clouds moved too slowly, swirling in wide arcs that didn't match the wind's direction. Some villagers looked up. Others did not. Those who did quickly looked away. Luma took her first step forward. The wind stirred. It circled her feet first, lifting small eddies of dust that spiraled up along her ankles. As she walked, it followed, never pushing, never pulling, only tracing her movements like something ancient recognizing its kin. Her veil, despite the breeze, did not move. It clung to her face like skin, as if the air itself dared not touch it. A small boy in the crowd let out a whimper. His mother hushed him with a hand over his mouth. As Luma passed, some villagers turned their backs. Others crossed their arms, muttering protection phrases beneath their breath. One man pressed a talisman of dried roots to his chest. An old woman near the bakery clutched her walking stick tighter and rocked back and forth, whispering, "Not the storm girl, not the storm girl." The village elders stood near the altar. All 8 of them were draped in ceremonial garb, robes dyed with ash and dust, feathers tied around their arms, eyes rimmed with charcoal. They did not smile. They did not nod. Their mouths moved in unison, lips barely parting as they chanted ancient protection spells under their breath, fingers twitching with remembered rhythms. Even they feared what the ceremony might awaken. The groom waited at the stone altar, smiling. Too wide. His teeth were unnaturally white, perfectly spaced, the kind of teeth no man living in this land had. His cloak billowed gently even though no wind touched him. And though the villagers had been whispering about how handsome and proper he was, no one could recall his name. Not clearly. Some said it was Mora. Others said Morrow. But every tongue seemed to forget it the moment it left their lips. He extended a hand as she approached. Luma didn't take it. She stepped onto the stone platform, the crowd holding its breath as she faced him, her back straight, her chin lifted despite the cords that bound her ribs. Her eyes, barely visible through the thin veil, locked on his face. The groom's smile twitched. The sky darkened further. A sudden hush swept through the village as thunder rolled once across the horizon. There had been no lightning. The sound wasn't sharp. It was low, like something massive turning over in its sleep. A warning. Or a call. Children clung to their mothers. A baby began to cry and a father quickly took it away from the square. The priest stepped forward, beads clicking at his wrists. He began the rite in a loud, steady voice. This is the joining of breath and shadow, of name and name. Let the seal be recognized in the sight of wind and root, of sky and stone. Luma's breath stilled. The ground beneath her bare feet felt wrong, too warm. The stones pulsed with faint heat, as though her presence was waking something beneath the altar. The groom reached forward again, taking her hand this time. His touch was cold. Not like ice. Like absence. Luma did not flinch, but her skin recoiled, goosebumps rising along her arms. Do you accept this joining? The priest asked her. Luma didn't answer. He repeated the question, louder this time, the cords creaking against her chest as she breathed. She accepts, the priest declared after a pause too long for comfort. The wind circled faster now. Small whirlwinds danced along the outer edge of the square, kicking up leaves and bits of bone left from old sacrifices. The altar stones rattled beneath their feet. Somewhere far off, a tree snapped in half with a dry, echoing crack. The elders' chants grew more urgent. One of them dropped his staff. Another's knees began to shake. Still, the groom's smile didn't waver. He leaned in and whispered, "It's nearly time." Luma met his eyes and saw something behind them, something vast. Not a man. Not even a beast. Something old, older than the village, older than the storms, something shaped like hunger and patience in the absence of light. Her breath hitched. The veil pressed tighter to her lips. The priest continued with the binding incantation. Let the silence within her be sealed. Let the curse be married into shadow. Let her breath no longer touch this world alone. Luma's hands began to tremble. The sky turned darker still, now nearly black with only faint rings of violet curling at the edges like bruises on skin. The air thickened, heavy with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. Birds had vanished entirely. Not a single wing flapped. Not a single cry echoed. The cords wrapped around her chest tightened, not by human hand but by unseen force. Something in the earth responded. Not noise. Not movement. But presence. And inside her, something stirred. Not fear. Memory. Her mother's voice again. You are not the curse. You are the seal. The wind surged forward. And this time it whispered her name. Ashchagpt. The silence that followed the priest's final words was unlike any that had come before. It was not the hush of reverence, nor the pause between drumbeats. It was a silence that pressed against the skin, that clogged the ears like mud, that made the heart feel small and frightened. The square, though full, was still as a grave. All eyes were on the groom. He stood tall, regal, perfect. The strange shimmer of his robe caught no dust. The wind circled him in gentle spirals, but his hair never moved. The cords around Luma's body pulsed once, as if resisting something they'd been commanded to obey. The groom turned toward her fully now, eyes glowing faintly beneath heavy lids, and raised his hand in preparation to speak. The vow. His mouth opened, but no words came. He stood like that, lips parted, tongue slightly visible, breath half inhaled, as though caught mid-sentence in a time that no longer moved forward. The expression on his face was not panic, but frustration, like a puppet waiting for a forgotten line. Luma stared. The air around them rippled. Then, from somewhere beyond the edge of the known world came the sound. It was not thunder. It was deeper than thunder. A groan. A roar. A cracking. A long, drawn-out rift as though a mountain was splitting open beneath the sea. The sound moved through the earth like a memory too large for one place. Birds screamed far off, then went silent again. The ground beneath the altar began to tremble. Dust sifted down from rooftops. Cracks spidered along the stone slabs under Luma's bare feet. The elders gasped. The villagers clutched their charms. The priest's hands began to shake. Still, the groom's mouth remained frozen, stretched open, jaw stiff, like it had been locked by something larger than spell or fear. Then Luma felt it, something warm and wet against her cheek. She reached up with bound fingers, uncertain. A single drop of rain. But it was not clear. Not light. It was thick like oil. Black like ink spilled from a deep, old well. It glistened as it slid down her cheek, leaving a trail that did not evaporate. The moment it touched her skin, the wind stopped moving. Everything stopped. For a heartbeat, time forgot to move forward. And then, her body remembered. But it was not her memory. She stumbled back slightly as something unfurled in her chest. Not pain, not even a vision, but knowing. A memory rising from a place beneath language. She felt her bones expand, her veins grow warm. Something ancient and buried was rising inside her. Not from outside. From within. Luma saw. Not a village, but a temple round and open to the stars, carved from black stone. In it a woman stood. She wore no veil. Her eyes were the color of storms. Around her neck was a chain of bones. She was not Luma. She had never been Luma. But Luma was part of her. The woman raised her arms and the wind bowed low. Behind her stood others. Not men, not gods, but creatures made of silence and breath. They waited. Watched. Fear. And before her stood a man who had no face. No shadow. No name. Only hunger. Luma gasped. The vision ended. The wind returned in a burst, scattering the cords that bound her. They flew off like ribbons caught in a gale, curling through the square and vanishing into the air. Her veil tore down the center and fluttered to the earth. The groom stepped back, blinking hard. His mouth snapped shut with a sound like a bone cracking. "You remember?" he said, voice hoarse. She did not answer. But something inside her had shifted, a door unlatched. The villagers stared, paralyzed. The priest stumbled backward. One of the elders collapsed. A fissure opened beneath the altar. And the sky wept a second drop of black rain. The priest's voice trembled as he lifted his staff toward the sky. His lips formed the final words of the rite, the binding, the sealing, the silencing, each syllable cracking like dry wood in his throat. In the sight of sky and root, of breath and silence, by old vow and older blood, let this union be sealed. The air grew sharp. And let her be bound. The sky split. It didn't rumble or roar, it broke. With a sound like bone being pried apart, a jagged tear ripped across the heavens, straight above the altar. Not lightning. Not storm. A rent. A wound in the fabric of the world. Through it poured a light no eye had ever seen. Not golden, not white, but searing raw, shaped like an enormous eye peering down from beyond stars, wide and watching. Its gaze swept across the square, and every villager dropped to their knees with a cry. Even the priest dropped his staff and covered his face. But Luma did not kneel. She stood beneath it, blinking into the light, the cords around her gone, her breath no longer held in. The groom screamed. Not in pain but in fury. His body convulsed, trembling like a shell trying to hold back a flood. His arms jerked unnaturally, and his neck cracked as his head tilted too far to one side. The shimmer in his eyes deepened, no longer beautiful but blinding. Black smoke burst from his mouth. The villagers screamed. A voice echoed from within him, not his own, not human, ancient and hungry. She remembers. She sees. His skin began to blister but not burn, change. Cracks formed along his arms, like stones splitting from within. His cloak melted into shadow, slithering down his legs like spilled ink. Horns began to grow from beneath his skull, curving outward like bone re-emerging from centuries of sleep. Luma stood still as the wind swirled around her. Then her veil caught fire. It burned with a heatless flame, curling inward, collapsing like old paper. It left no ash, no smoke, only open air. Her face, long hidden, was revealed beneath the eye. She lifted her chin. The groom took a step back. His mouth opened again, wider than a human mouth should. "You were the seal." "No," Luma said softly. "I am the lock." And the sky watched. Ask ChatGPT. The light from the great eye above narrowed, its beam tightening like a breath drawn and held. It washed over Luma, searing through the broken sky and touching her forehead with terrifying precision. She did not flinch. She did not blink. Her eyes remained fixed upward, steady beneath its gaze. The instant the light kissed her skin, something bloomed. A sigil, ancient, radiant and alive, flared gold against her brow. Its lines burned into being not like fire but like memory. A circle with jagged points at its edges, a spiral in the center, a mark older than the village, older than language. The wind howled. Around her, the villagers began to scream. Some dropped their charms and fled. Others clutched their faces, weeping without knowing why. The elders turned and ran, robes flapping behind them like torn wings. One man collapsed to his knees, whispering, "She was never the curse, we were." But it was too late. The groom turned toward her with a mouth full of hatred and shadow. His form was breaking now, not just splitting but unraveling. The illusion of flesh melted away, revealing something twisted beneath. Sinews of smoke, bones of ash, eyes that burned like sunless stars. He reached out with a scream not of pain but defiance, rage at being exposed. And then he crumbled. From the center of his chest outward, he cracked into powder. No fire. No explosion. Only silence and the slow rain of ash falling to the altar stones. He was gone. Unmade. Not defeated, dismissed. Luma stood alone, surrounded by the pieces of a ceremony that was never meant to bless her, only cage her. The great eye in the sky began to close. And then her mother's voice returned, no longer from beneath the earth, but from within her, warm, steady, whole. You were not the curse. Luma closed her eyes. The sigil on her brow pulsed gently. You were born to hold it back. But they tried to chain you instead. She understood now. She had not been the danger. She had been the key to the door they feared. The one who kept the hunger contained. The one meant to hold it, not unleash it. And when they tried to silence her, veil her, bind her, they had undone the very protection they were too blind to see. Her breath was not poison. It was the barrier. Her silence was not shame. It was power held in balance. Now the lock was open. But she still stood. Rain began to fall as the last of the villagers fled the square. Not a storm like any they had known, not the dry tantrums of sky that threw dust and lightning without water, nor the bitter winds that passed over their land in silence for years. This rain was full. It carried the weight of forgotten seasons. The smell of it alone made the trees sigh. But it did not touch the earth. It hovered, suspended in the air like breath held too long. The droplets circled above and around her, Luma standing alone in the center of the broken altar. Her dress hung heavy with blood and ash. Her veil was gone. The sigil on her brow still glowed softly, and the light from the sky, now closed, left a shimmer in the air above her. She looked up. The rain spun slowly around her like a crown. Drops clustered at her fingertips but would not fall. Instead, they shimmered as though waiting for something. Waiting for her. The earth beneath her feet was still warm. The altar stones hummed faintly with the memory of what had passed. The square lay abandoned. Even the wind, which had once dared not touch her, now curled gently around her legs and hair, like a loyal animal returning to its master. She raised her hand. And the wind obeyed. It moved, not with chaos, not with force, but with will. Her will. It gathered beneath the hovering rain, lifted it, spun it into a slow spiral that widened and rose, sweeping the square in silence. The droplets began to shimmer brighter, kissed by the last flickers of the sigil's glow. Then they fell. Not all at once, but in a rhythm. First at the edges of the village, then over the roofs, then into the trees and fields that had withered for so long. The ground drank hungrily. The cracked earth split open to welcome it. Leaves unfolded. Roots twitched beneath the surface. Somewhere in the distance, a frog croaked for the first time in years. But not a single drop touched Luma. Around her, the rain formed a clear sphere, spinning, shifting, waiting. She stood in the eye of the living storm. Her hair floated slightly around her face, moved by wind that now belonged to her. Her breath no longer stirred fear. It stirred the air. She took one step forward. And the storm followed. The villagers would not forget what they saw that day, even if none could explain it. Some said she vanished into the sky itself, her body dissolving into mist as the clouds swallowed her. Others swore they saw her walking into the forest, barefoot and glowing, with thunder under her skin. A child claimed the rain stopped falling whenever she whispered Luma's name. Whatever the truth, none dared call her cursed again. They built no statue. They held no ceremony. But they left the square untouched. No one walked on the altar stones again. The ash was never swept. The sigil faded from memory, but not from stone. A year later, when the rains returned again, they began to whisper a different name when the skies darkened. The bride in the storm. A girl who stood against the thing behind the veil. A girl who was born not to be feared, but to be heeded. A girl who held the wind in her hand and never bowed. And when lightning lit the sky, it no longer brought fear. It brought silence. The kind that listens. The kind that waits. Ask ChatGPT.